Hello, I thought we'd take a culinary trip from Old England to New England for today's recipe. So, pack your car by the barnyard and come in for some good chowder. Today, in the spirit of good old Yankee resourcefulness, I'm going to share a recipe for smoked mackerel and corn chowder. It's simple, quick, super inexpensive, and I think you may really enjoy it. For hundreds of years, immigrants have been arriving in their new adoptive countries, bringing little except some clothes, a few personal belongings, and if they were lucky, some wonderful cooking traditions from back home. Coming to North America in the 19th or 20th century usually meant that you were extremely poor and might only be able to afford whatever you could milk from a cow or dig from the earth or fish from the sea. But as we know, being financially poor is a circumstance that inspires many humans to be resourceful and crafty with what they have. And this includes getting delicious results from simple and inexpensive ingredients. The origin of the term chowder is a bit obscure. Some people think it comes from the French word chaudron, which means cauldron. And that kind of makes sense. You'd probably originally cook it in a cauldron, so I'm going with that backstory. Chowders are at least 250 years old and were brought over to the New World, to North America, by French and English immigrants who, of course, took ships to get there. And they used sea biscuits or ship biscuits, beaten down or pulverized to thicken this rather simple soup. I love this dish because it's simple, it's flavorful, it's super healthy, and you can make it the year round. Let's talk a little bit about ingredients. If you can see here, this is all of the ingredients that we're using for the chowder today. So I've got 400. Yep, I've got 400 mils of milk. I'm using semi-skimmed to keep the overall fat content down a little bit, but you could use whole milk if you wanted to. I've got, what have I have here? I have some tinned smoked mackerel. This, of course, is going to bring some lovely flavor to the dish. This, seafoody, fishy, salty flavor, as well as the smoked flavor as well. You can use plain, if you will, plain tinned mackerel in brine, and that will be very nice also. You obviously won't get the smoky flavor, but it's delicious, and it's about half the price. So a tin of mackerel in brine is about 65p, and this was double the price. This was about 135p for this tin of smoked mackerel. We have a can of corn. You can use frozen corn, which works just as well, and it's cheaper. This tin it was 50p, and frozen corn is going to be cheaper. If you're lucky and corn is available and in season, use fresh corn. Don't cook it. Just use the large holes on a grater and grate the corn for this recipe. The remaining ingredients, I've got an onion, I've got a potato, I've got a tomato, which is strictly not in this needed in this recipe, but I think I'll use it for a bit of garnish. It's a lovely color. A couple of bay leaves, and some fresh herbs. In this case, I've got some parsley and dill hanging about, so I'll use that for the chowder. And olive oil. Of course, the cost for these ingredients, in terms of the amounts used, work out to pennies. So overall, it's a really, really inexpensive dish to make. Let's talk about the prep. There's not that much to do. We've got an onion that needs to be finely diced. A potato, same thing, finely diced, about the same size as the corn kernels. And some fresh chopped herbs. For the onion, just take both ends off, and on the root end, of course, leave that root end fairly intact. Don't cut too much of that off, because that is going to keep the onion together. You can slice the onion in half. Get the paper off. Okay, so to finally dice the onion, with the root at this end here, just take the knife and cut into the onion following the contour of the shape of the onion, and be careful not to cut through completely to the root. Okay, and then when you get towards the end, the onion becomes a little bit wobbly, so just turn it over and work comfortably and continue slicing, working your way towards that root. Depending on how much it's finely chopped at this point, you can continue cutting till you get the shape that you want. And repeat with the other half. And that's the onion done. Then peel the potato. And for the potato, you want to chop this or cut this up pretty finely, more or less about the size of the corn kernels, because we don't want this to be a potato and corn soup. It's a smoked fish and corn chowder. So I'm taking slices off the potato, a little bit thicker than the corn kernel. Then you can stack these up and cut into kind of sticks. And then cut the sticks into dice. You don't have to be perfect, but aim for some consistency. And that's the potato done. And then finally the chopped herbs. And these you can just bunch up into a kind of ball and then slice. And that's the herbs done. Okay, so we'll begin by sauteing the chopped onions in 2 tablespoons of olive oil over a medium heat. For the onions, we want to just soften these over the medium heat, and we don't really want them to color, just until they're soft and translucent. Okay, that's been about 5 minutes, and you want to keep an eye on your onions while they're sauteing so they don't take on much color. And if the pan's getting too hot, obviously reduce the heat. And if you need a quick solution, add a little bit of water, a few tablespoons of water, and this will bring the heat right down, and then you can continue sauteing. Okay, next step is to add the potatoes. 400 mils of milk. I'm using semi-skimmed. And then the same amount of water, 400 mils, to the pot. Give this a good stir. Should be at about a medium heat. And let's just bring this to the simmer. It'll take about 5 minutes before we add the corn. Okay, that's been just about 5 minutes, and now I'm going to add the bay leaves because I should have added them before and I forgot, but it's going to be okay. And stir in the corn, and for this corn, this was the canned corn. I didn't drain it. If you taste the juice in the can, it's just wonderful. It's really sweet and lovely, so I'm adding that as well. There's not that much juice. This is coming together. It's looking like chowder. Okay, so we're going to let that simmer for about 5 minutes, and the goal here is to heat the corn through and bring the flavors together. And the potato will require the most cooking, so I'll want to test the doneness of the potato before I remove it from the fire. But let it simmer for about 5 minutes. We'll add the smoked mackerel at the last step. It doesn't require cooking, it just needs heated through, and in fact it will dissolve pretty quickly in the heat, so we want to avoid giving that any more heat than it needs. Okay, so that's been about 10 minutes, and I'm gonna just check the doneness of the veg, especially the potatoes. It's super nice. It's been about 10 minutes cooking. The vegetables are really tender. The sweetness of the corn is still distinct from the other ingredients. It's really nice. Okay, right. So just before serving, we want to add the fish, and I've turned the heat completely off now because the cooking is done, and we don't want to cook the fish any more than we have to. Now, I'm using smoked mackerel for this recipe, and it comes packed in oil. I've drained this off because we don't need it, and it's going to create an oil slick on the chowder. So I've drained that off. If you are using mackerel in brine, for instance, like this, I wouldn't drain it. It's got very little fat in it, and the brine is delicious. It's like a fish stock. It's lovely. So I would add the entire contents of this. The oily one, I would drain before you stir it into the chowder. Right. So let's just add this. I'm breaking it up just a little bit before it goes into the pot. Giving that a bit of a stir, and you can use your wooden spoon to distribute the pieces of mackerel a bit more evenly into the chowder. And I would let that set for about 5 minutes before serving. That will heat the mackerel through and distribute the flavor, and just give it a good stir before serving. This looks great, it smells great, and I think we're ready to serve. So I have some nice toasted whole wheat pita bread to go with the chowder. This looks really delicious. And then to garnish, don't forget about the chopped herbs. And I've diced up some tomatoes as well for a bit of color. And that looks beautiful. Good chowder.